There's a number in your spreadsheet right now that doesn't look like the others, and you already know which one I mean because you've stared at it before, wondering if it's a mistake or the most important row you've got. I run a few small businesses on my own, and I check my own revenue, churn, and conversion numbers every single week. So I run into weird looking rows constantly, and I've had to figure out the hard way which ones to trust and which ones to fix before they quietly warp a decision. Nobody hands you a manual for this when you start out on your own, so a lot of what I'm about to walk through is stuff I learned by getting it wrong first. Siap. Let's start with the actual definition because it's simpler than people make it sound. An outlier is just a data point that sits far away from the rest of your data. That's the whole thing. It doesn't tell you the point is wrong. It doesn't tell you it's a fluke. It definitely doesn't tell you whether it matters. It only tells you the number looks unusual next to its neighbors, and nothing more than that. If you run a one-person business and you look at your own numbers regularly, you've already met a few of these. The customer who paid you 10 times what everyone else pays. The day your sign-up page got hit by a bot, and your conversion rate looked like it tripled overnight. The month one client canceled and dragged your whole churn number up on its own, even though nothing else about your business had changed. None of those are automatically bad data. Some of them are the most real things sitting in your dataset, more real than the tidy average sitting next to them. The actual job isn't spotting the outlier. That part is easy. The job is figuring out which kind you're looking at, and that takes a beat of thought before you touch any formula. Here's the part a lot of outlier advice online gets wrong for people like us. Most of it is written for huge datasets, where a handful of odd rows just wash out in the noise and nobody notices them come or go. You're probably not in that position. If you've got 400 customers and one of them pays 5 times the average, that moves your average noticeably, maybe enough to change a pricing decision. If you had 400,000 customers, that same person would barely register. When your sample is small, one weird row can swing a number you're about to make a real decision with, which is exactly why this matters more for a solo operator than for a big company's analytics team. In practice, the weird rows in small business data tend to come from a short list of places, and 2 of them are basically mechanical. The first is a plain tracking or entry error, a test transaction nobody deleted, a tracking pixel that fired twice, a refund that got logged as a brand new charge instead of a reversal. The second is a genuine one-off event, a customer who canceled because their company shut down and not because of anything you did, or a traffic spike because someone posted your product on a forum you've never even heard of. The other 2 sources are about who your customers actually are. The third is a real but rare customer, the whale who buys your top tier the same week you launch it, or the person who never touches a single feature in your free trial and cancels on day 2 anyway. The fourth is seasonality, or a promotion, a launch discount that pulls in a batch of low-value signups you wouldn't normally see in a typical month. Each of those 4 needs a different response, which is exactly why just remove the outliers is bad advice on its own. Follow that advice blindly, and you delete real customers alongside real mistakes and call it cleanup. So before you touch any statistical method, ask the boring question first. Is this number wrong? Or is it just unusual? An error should usually get fixed or pulled out entirely. A genuine extreme value should usually stay, because deleting it just means you're editing reality to make your dashboard prettier, and prettier isn't the same as truer. Say you're looking at average order value, and one row shows an order for $9,400 from a store that normally sells $60 items. Go look at it directly instead of guessing. Maybe it's a duplicate charge from a webhook retry firing twice, and that's an error, so you fix it. Maybe it's a real bulk order from a corporate buyer, and that's real, so you keep it, though you might note it's not representative of your typical customer when you're explaining the month to yourself. You cannot tell the difference by staring at the number on a screen. You have to go open the actual record every time, because a method for spotting an outlier is only useful as a prompt to go check something. It is never a verdict on its own, and treating it like one is how good data quietly turns into a wrong decision. You don't need a statistics degree to find these in a small business data set. Sort your customer list by revenue or your order list by amount and scroll to the top and the bottom. That sounds too simple to mention, but it's the fastest way to catch a $9,400 duplicate before it ever feeds into a calculation you rely on later. There's also what I think of as the middle 90% trick. Look at where most of your values actually sit, then check anything that falls well outside that range. One common version of this uses what's called the interquartile range, where you find the 0.25% of your values fall below and the 0.75% fall below, then flag anything much further than that gap in either direction. You don't need to compute this by hand. A spreadsheet quartile function does it in one line, and most analytics tools will show you percentiles directly without any setup at all. Another rough method is counting standard deviations from the average. If your data is roughly bell-shaped, a value more than 2 or 3 standard deviations from the mean is unusual enough to look at closer. This one breaks down fast on skewed data though, and most business data is skewed, since revenue and order sizes are rarely symmetric. So treat it as a rough flag and not a rule you lean on for anything important. And honestly, sometimes the simplest thing works best. Just plot it. A basic time series chart or scatter plot will show you a spike or a dip before any formula catches up to it. If your daily signups suddenly jump to 5 times the usual number, you'll see that on a chart before you ever calculate anything. None of these methods tell you what to do next. They only tell you where to look closer, which is a genuinely different thing from telling you what the number means. And it's worth being honest with yourself about that gap every time you use one. It's worth knowing what an unnoticed outlier can quietly do to the numbers you already track, starting with monthly recurring revenue. One large customer can make that number look stable when it really isn't. And if losing that single account would knock out a big chunk of your total, that's worth knowing on its own, separate from whether it technically counts as a statistical outlier at all. Churn works the same way. A single enterprise cancellation can spike your churn rate for a whole month, even though your day-to-day retention hasn't actually changed underneath it. Looking at churn by customer count and churn by revenue separately helps here, because those two views can tell you completely different stories the moment one big account walks out the door. Customer lifetime value is especially sensitive to this, because an average gets pulled hard by a handful of very high spenders. If your lifetime value number is being dragged up by a few unusually large accounts, that number is describing those accounts more than it's describing your typical customer, which matters a lot if you're using it to decide how much you can afford to spend acquiring the next one. Conversion rates and funnels get distorted in the same way. Bot traffic, a broken tracking event, or one referral source dumping a pile of low-intent visitors can throw off a conversion number for a day or a week. Segmenting by traffic source before you calculate an overall rate often exposes exactly this. The same danger shows up in a test comparing two versions of something, where one unusually large order landing in one version, purely by chance, can decide the whole result. That's one more reason a result that looks significant on a small sample deserves a second look before you roll it out everywhere, especially if you can trace the win back to 1 or 2 unusual transactions. So once you've actually separated the errors from the real extreme values, what do you do with them? Fix or remove the confirmed errors outright. The duplicate charges, the test data, the broken tracking events, those don't belong in the calculation at all. Full stop. No judgment call required once you've confirmed their errors. For real extreme values, the answer is almost never delete. Keep them, but report more than one number, showing both the average and the median lifetime value. Say, since the median won't get pulled around by a few big spenders the way an average will. If a handful of enterprise customers behave completely differently from everyone else, it can also make more sense to look at them as their own group rather than blending them into one overall average that ends up describing nobody accurately. 2 more habits are worth building in. Some people kept extreme values at a chosen point, sometimes called Windsorizing, purely for reporting, so one row doesn't dominate a chart, while the real number stays untouched in the underlying data for anything that actually needs it, like an invoice or a tax record. And if a decision hinges on one number, rerun it with and without the outlier included. If the conclusion changes depending on whether that one row is there, that's a sign you're making a call based on a single data point, and that's worth knowing before you act on it, not after. Here's the thing none of this can tell you, and it's the part I'd want you to remember most. No method here tells you whether an unusual number is good news, bad news, or just noise. A method only flags a value as far from the pack. Whether that value actually matters to your business is a judgment call, and it's one only you can make. With the context you have about your customers, your product, and what actually happened that particular week. Nobody else has that context, not a spreadsheet formula, and not me watching from outside your business, which is exactly why this stays a judgment call no method can make for you. Treat outlier detection as a way to know where to look closer, never as a substitute for looking, and you'll get the use out of it that it's actually built for. Every one of these explainers lives in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com, the whole metric library in plain English. Every metric explained in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com. And if this was useful, go ahead and subscribe for the next one.